Hello, I'm continuing Sharp's whistle-stop tour of the history of Dartmoor, well, our history of Dartmoor, ready to do our plays about legends and myths of Dartmoor. We've got to medieval times. Last time there were 5 different worksheets all on different aspects of medieval life. I'm carrying on with one more aspect of medieval life, which is going to take us into the Tudor period, which was the next bit of history. But we really do need to know about this particular bit for the place that we're going to look at that's on Dartmoor. So, what am I going to talk about? Well, monastic life. Monastic, what on earth does that mean? That's monks, men who devoted their life to God. So, by the 3rd and 4th century AD, remember we did that ages ago, that's after Jesus was born, the Christian calendar, not the only calendar in the world, but the one that's been used in this country for thousands of years. The Christian calendar says the dates go BC, before Christ was born, and AD. So we're talking about 3rd and 4th century, about 300 or 400 years after Jesus was born. Christianity came to England and Ireland, Wales and Scotland. Exactly when, we don't know. Who brought it? There are all sorts of myths and legends about that, some involving snakes in Ireland. That's not the story we're going to tell. But by the 4th century, this country was definitely Christian, and this group of people had emerged, monks, who were the men, nuns, who were the women, who chose to live a completely religious life. They didn't get married, they didn't have children, they weren't allowed to. They lived their whole life inside monasteries or convents, which was the places they lived. And these were attached to a church. And there are ruins of these monasteries and convents all over England. And there are just a few that still remain. And if you look at the plans of them, which is on your worksheet too, they were all built in kind of the same way. And the lives of those monks and those nuns were very, very similar. There were lots of different groups, like different, like football teams almost, at different, you chose which ones you were. So the ones in the abbey that we're going to be looking at, Buckfast Abbey, which is just down the road from where I'm standing, they were called Cistercian monks, and they had a very simple life. They swore off, they took a vow of poverty. That meant that they had to be very poor, they didn't have any possessions of their own, they slept in cells, little rooms with very little, just a wooden cross on the wall. Not all monks were like that, but a lot of them did have this very, very simple life, and they certainly did at Buckland Abbey. So, worksheet 1 gives you a couple of pictures and tells you about some of those different monks. Worksheet 2 gives you the floor plan of Westminster Abbey, which still has all the features of an abbey. That's where they lived. And if you look at that map, it mentions things like the cloisters. The cloisters in abbeys, there are many more whole abbeys left in Europe, and the cloisters is my favourite place. If you go to them, it's like a sort of square area where you have a sort of walkway around the outside, which is an archway, quite big, and in the middle is a garden or just a patch of grass. My friend of mine lives in Chichester, and they've still got the cloisters, as they're called. They're absolutely beautiful and a very peaceful place to be. And the monks spent time there. They'd go and pray in the church and have service in the church, up to 8 a day. 8 a day. And then they'd be allowed to go out to these places for a peaceful think, meditate, we might say nowadays, before they went and did all their work. So that gives you kind of an idea of the shape. The churches are really, really big in the shape of a cross, and then you have the cloisters and you have the chapter house, which is another area, it's a place where the monks went. So it's just give you an idea of how big these places were and where they spent their time. The final worksheet is about a day in the life of a monk. My goodness me, they had a pretty tough time. They woke up at 2 in the morning for their first service. They went to bed at 8, so they hadn't had very many hours sleep by the time they had to get up again. And they got up at 2. You'll see on that the timetable. They prayed, they went to services, they atoned for their sins. That means they admitted their sins. In a day like that, I'm thinking, what sins did they commit? What bad things did they do? Where did they have time to do this? They were either praying or working or eating. And they only ate once in winter and twice in the summer months, presumably because they spent slightly longer working. I don't know. But they didn't eat very much. So when they found time to be naughty, I don't know. But you have a look at their day. It's pretty harsh. But then most people's lives in medieval times were pretty harsh, so maybe being a monk was better than being a peasant, and particularly a poor peasant. I don't know. So have a look at those worksheets and think about what it might have been like to be a medieval monk.